I always felt like I was an outsider trying to fit in, like the only brown kid in my elementary school in suburban Colorado, and then suddenly surrounded by all these people who looked like me in India, but me feeling like a total outsider American with an American accent. And then coming back and having that reverse again. So but yeah, so like place and belonging are like the two core themes I think in what shaped who I am and what I do.
The goal of equity in the United States is very big. It is, in fact, a vision that we may not see in our lifetimes. At the same time, it is possible to make progress towards equity. It is possible to make these incremental steps, which often comes in conflict with the need for urgent change. Coming up, I'll be talking with Parvathi Santhosh-Kumar, who I call one of the best optimists, pragmatists, idealists I know. And we're going to talk about what does it mean to hold all of these things at the same time, to have the ideal of equity, to be realistic about what's possible, and to still be very optimistic about what you can do. I'm Dr. Adriane Johnson-Williams, and this is Equitable. Hello, Parv. Thank you for joining me.
Hey Adrian, so great to be here.
I have been looking forward to this conversation because I can't believe we've known each other for a decade probably now
Yep,
and
10
have followed each
years.
other's careers. And I want to talk to you about a number of the things that we've learned as we've walked alongside each other. But before we do that, please introduce yourself to our listeners by just talking about who you are as a human being. You don't get to talk about your work.
When people ask me where I'm from, I always kind of sigh a little because it's not a short answer. I grew
Mm-hmm.
up moving around every few years all over the world. I was born in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Colorado, India, Oman, Maryland, and Wisconsin, and came to Chicago for college, went to Boston for grad school, came back to Chicago, called that place home for like 10 plus years, and I'm now a new Southerner living in Nashville for the last almost 3 years this summer. So yeah, I feel like growing up moving around made me really curious about, why places are the way they are, how your community shapes who you are and who you become. And I was just feel like from an early age really hungry to help shape how you can make place work better for
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And being someone who was kind of always a fish out of water, I think it's kind of a common experience for people to feel like belonging is something you're seeking.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I always felt like I was an outsider trying to fit in, like the only brown kid in my elementary school in
Yeah.
suburban Colorado, and then suddenly surrounded by all these people who looked like me in India, but me feeling
Mm-hmm.
like a total outsider American
Yeah.
with an American accent.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming back and having that reverse again. So but yeah, so like place and belonging are like the two core themes I think in what
Mm-hmm.
shaped who I am and what I do.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the South. I will welcome you.
Thank you.
We are happy to have you in the South.
It's been
And no matter
great.
what you say, Memphis is better than Nashville. Okay.
We'll throw down on that later, I'm sure. But there's room. The world is wide enough for both Memphis and Nashville.
That's very lovely of you. So now tell us what you do for a living or tell us about your work in any way you want to.
Yeah, so I've really spent my career working at the intersection of systems change work in education and economic mobility, locally, nationally, and globally. So I got my like dream job out of grad school working for Mayor Emanuel in Chicago on everything education policy. From there, spent kind of grew up as a professional at Strive Together, which is where we met, really supporting cradle to career partnerships across the country. And now, for about 3 years, I've been at America's Promise Alliance, which is a community of CEOs and executive teams of nearly 200 youth supporting nonprofits around the country that all work in K 12 education, post secondary pathways, and democracy. And we work with these executive teams to help them strengthen their organizations, but also work in community with each other to work on collective action work to create better outcomes for every next generation. So it's been really exciting and powerful to just kind of hold space and um, create meaningful spaces for people to grow and learn and improve their organizations and then work better together on things that they couldn't do themselves. But especially just in this time, creating that relational space for people and being a leader, an executive leader in such a tumultuous time can feel really lonely at the top. We're creating those places where people feel really seen and again kind of feel like they belong. But then outside of my work, I've really immersed myself in Nashville. So I got involved in city government here. I serve as a commissioner on our city's anti-poverty agency. So I'm on the board, and that's been really a powerful way to put equity work into practice at the city level. But then also, sing in a nonprofit choir in town, and I'm a regular at Creative Mornings every month. So, just keeping busy, doing fun things.
I really want to dig into what you were saying about the kind of general arc of your career or your focus on systems change, education, and economic mobility. Um, I know that we in our community of practice talk about results and talk about all people, all children, all youth. And one of the things I've always appreciated about you is your ability to hold the ideal and the pragmatic at the same time. So, um, talk about what that has looked like in your work. What does it mean to pursue equity without keeping your head in the clouds and really trying to make it happen?
It is such a it's like a conundrum in some ways, right? To have that competing commitment between the vision and the aspiration and like what's pragmatic and possible. And I think for me, part of it was starting in government, maybe that, like when you work for an ambitious mayor, an elected official who needs to get reelected in, T minus four minus X amount of time, the pressure is on to deliver results and to have those milestones and success stories of what progress looks like. And so, you have to have a bold vision about what's possible and, say the grand vision around, creating a world class education for every kid in Chicago. Like that's what we were working towards every day when I was working for Mayor Emanuel. And at the same time, you was like getting to brass tacks about what's really possible today. Like, how can we um, make it possible for all the funding that comes from the new speed cameras and red light cameras that are going up to actually fund pre-K education? How do we get the bureaucratic Head Start program system to collaborate with the bureaucratic Chicago Public Schools system to actually work on co-locating classrooms and braiding funding so that you can open more pre-K classrooms in the communities that have the most need. So it was like, yes, you can name the bold vision and know that the only way to get to the bold vision is through like lots of little incremental steps and pushing the envelope every step of the way. And I feel like I've carried that spirit through my whole career of, I am super optimistic. Like I'm always the positive person in the room that believes everything is possible. And it's also about like, well, what realistically can we do right now?
So when you think about that, and you mentioned collaboration and particularly around those two bureaucratic systems working together, which I could do an entire series just on bureaucracy, why we should love it and why we hate it. But we won't do that today. Um, how do you think about, how do you support people in understanding that incremental is still progress? Because when you're communicating this huge vision, and you really are serious about making sure that all, including the most burdened or most disadvantaged, are getting what they need, it might not look like that in the near term. So how have you managed that?
In my work right now, a lot of it looks like helping people break it down. So, like, in a really quickly changing environment, like planning almost seems like a luxury in so much of the work because like you can't see a 3-year strategic planning horizon. And so like even just thinking about the next 6 months or the next 12 months or how do we make sure that our organizations survive this year is what so many nonprofits are facing right now. And so in the capacity building work that I do now, so much of the action planning cycle that we support people through is setting a bold vision, having a clear result statement, and then like building the bones of that action plan and pushing people to small action commitments and what are those next steps that you're taking, so like if you're working on a 6-month plan to strengthen your fundraising strategy in an incredibly challenging time where philanthropy is being extra risk averse right now, public systems are not funding in the same way that they were, and corporations are like even more risk averse than before, and individual giving is kind of all over the place, right? So, but you can break it down and still take a look at, well, what is the piece of our work with foundations that we need to strengthen and like what's the next step that we can take? And it may not feel like, okay, we're getting a multi-million dollar grant next week and we're going to celebrate that, but it can look like we've improved our collateral and we have a stronger pipeline list and the little things that will over time build up so that you'll get to those bigger milestones later.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I struggle with often in the communities and collaborations that I work with is the idea of urgency and how um, the folks that we're really trying to support um, have been in these really horrible situations for a long time. So why aren't we making faster progress now? And right now, what I'm seeing is that it's even harder to make faster progress for all the reasons that you've said. Are you hearing those kinds of conversations and struggles among the leaders that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many so many of the young people that organizations support have been challenged for a long time, right? Like this is not a new crisis, and a lot of the current environment is like a manufactured crisis in a lot of ways, right? And so nonprofits right now are faced with just a like I don't even know how the metaphor to use, but it feels like the water is drying up in so many ways, both in terms of the the burnout that exists in the people keeping these organizations afloat, the lack of reliable, sustainable funding and support, both from philanthropy and from public institutions, the just the ongoing struggle of leading in a tumultuous world right now and the uncertainty and you can talk about a VUCA world all day. And at the same time, like the the challenges that we're up against are just persistent perennial problems and like this and we have to find ways to meet the moment and meet the needs of the young people that we serve. So like every year at APA we do like a state of young people report and a kind of insights from the field of like what are we hearing from nonprofit leaders. And there's a data around are young people thriving, right? Kind of similar to the kids count that Casey Foundation does. And it feels like it's stagnant, right? Like young people are not thriving and are the organizations that support young people are not thriving either. And so we need like to create those that like infrastructure that bolsters the people that lead this work to be able to sustain this work over time. And that's sort of what we're trying to be and trying to create for the movement is like that that support system for the leaders to be able to carry forward, to learn from one another, to not have to learn the same mistakes over and over again, but to borrow what's working from another organization and feel kind of buoyed by the optimism of others around them to kind of keep the work moving.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I've been saying a lot lately that you never let a crisis go to waste. And I've been talking about what does it mean to be adaptive as a nonprofit. And I'm curious about what you think the opportunities are right now for nonprofit leaders and organizations so that they can stay focused on the most pressing needs of young
I think you just said it there, which is focus, right? Like in times like these, organizations should be focused on what they are best in the world at, because it is really easy to try to just do everything for everyone or mission creep your way to being a blob, right? But like if every entity really focused on doubling down on what they are best in the world at and found the ways to create that connective strategic partnerships and work across organizations so that together we can create like supportive systems for young people from cradle to career and beyond, that's where the magic can happen, right? So instead of having people doing overlapping work, um, creating just like a messy system, if we actually have everyone elevating the work that they do best and then having the clean handoffs and clear support networks across their systems, then we're basically building that new connective tissue around the public systems that we have.
and that what you just said is why I really appreciate you in terms of the pragmatism. But at the same time, it's really difficult for leaders to do that. I just I've been working with a client, and again, strategic planning is not a real thing right now. So we did something that's really fluid with like three primary pillars. But one of the most painful conversations we had was that they were trying to do a lot of crisis management for people calling in who need help, and they don't do crisis management, right? They have a very specific mission. I mean, it's really clear the work that they're supposed to be doing. And when I said two things. I said, you're not a national organization. You can't be trying to bring people from all over the country in here. And you're not a crisis manager. So you have to figure out who to send people to when they're in crisis. You can't do it. It was like they panicked. They were appalled. They were freaking out. What's going to happen to these people? What if we don't have partners who can manage it? What do we do? Like just really beginning to catastrophize. And and so when I said like this, focusing too broadly will threaten you and threaten the people you actually want to serve. It's been really hard for them to take that up. So while um, I am, as you well know, really committed to people doing the best that they can do to move things forward, folks find that incredibly hard. Are you engaging? Are you having any of those conversations? So when you say you should focus, like what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I often think of the ultra new shore as like the centerpiece of like supporting people through the change management of this, but um accepting the reality that you can't do everything is really hard and is easier said than done. And, I have not met an organization that hasn't had a reduction in force of some kind in the last year. And so it is a myth to believe that we can do more with less, right? Like we can do smarter with less, we can do different with less, but we can't do more with less. We have to accept that we have to do less and do better somehow at the same time, right? And so, like, the only way to do less and still do better is to really focus and find the right strategic partners. So we've actually supported a lot of our alliance members to think about strategic collaborate like multi-organizational collaborations or strategic partnerships, or in some cases there we've even seen mergers and acquisitions happen among our community or with organizations outside of the network where people are seeing the opportunity for the young people they serve, right? Because it's not necessarily just about these organizations and these small businesses effectively, or large businesses in some cases, but it's about if we really put the young people at the center and put that result at the center, and we're trying to create a seamless supportive experience where someone described it as like we have to invert the service burden so that young people have a seamless experience and support network. And that really spoke and resonated with me that, you know, if we put all our egos aside and really focus on what young people need, it, the, the organizational names and structures matter less than how all these supports and services get knit together.
Ooh, you just brought up, oh, there are two things that really um, came out of that for me. One was the potential loss associated with strategic partnerships, mergers and acquisitions, right? Really doing that. And the other was being realistic about the need to just close, because if you're not able to really function as a business, and your business relies on grant funds, then you're really taking up resources that could be better used elsewhere. Have you seen that out there?
We've definitely seen organizations close their doors in the last couple of years, and it's always really hard, right? Because that journey is that level of loss is significant, particularly for the people who are really close and involved. And I haven't seen this as much in the U.S., but I just learned about an organization in the UK that is like exists to help organizations close in more human centered ways.
Wow.
Yeah. Thanks,
Oh,
Marianne, for that tip.
yes.
But it was such a cool idea of like deceleration almost. And like, in a world where everyone is focused on growth and scale and bigger, bigger is better. In some cases, actually, the more powerful step to take would be to get smaller or slow down or actually wind down operations so that you can free up resources for someone else.
Yeah. And I know that there's also this other really immediate concern too, because the people who work there then become people who really need support in other ways. So to solve this bigger problem, you're actually creating other problems. I had a conversation recently about how nonprofits are businesses, and what we're doing, what we often do is think about them as, we don't think about nonprofits as businesses, and so we don't think about the inherent values conflict in running a business while you're actually focused on um, equitable outcomes or supporting vulnerable people, because those things are often in conflict. Often in conflict. Um, yeah, that's something I've really been struggling with lately. That sends me off on a little bit of a spiral, because I'm constantly talking about values, and being able to say, yes, you have your values, you're committed to your values, and we don't live in a world where you can be 100% committed to your values and pay people. Right?
Well, it's like the biggest piece of your organization that demonstrates your values is your budget, right? So, like, I actually care very little about the core values on people's websites, right? You care much more about what actions are you taking, where are you spending your money, where are you investing your resources as an organization, what where are you choosing to do your work, how is that happening, right? That is much more meaningful than any statement you can make or any public claim you put on Instagram, right? Like none of that really matters. What matters is I heard this recently, not in a nonprofit context, but somebody was suggesting that in addition to like the health ratings you see in windows of restaurants, like could we have the wage of the lowest paid worker at that restaurant like in the window, and would that encourage people to spend their resources somewhere else, somewhere that actually provides a living wage to those employees. And there's probably like some equivalent of that for our work too, right? Like if we had more visibility around what are the programs and services that actually are the most impactful, are the most needed, then like the whole world could change. And I think the back to the kind of small incremental change of like one big thing that I feel like is a small lever to get people there is to focus on just listen to young people, right? And so it's like, if you do nothing else, ensure that part of your youth supporting nonprofit strategy includes like getting qualitative data from the young people in your programs about your program so that you improve your program based on the feedback you get from youth participants, not just what you believe as the grown-ups who work there. And so, thinking about the mindset shift and the action shift that you see through in like making that a core part of the systems and structures of how nonprofits do their annual planning and strategy. Like that is a place to intervene.
So what? You said so much of that. So, I'm working with a community right now where I really push them in going back to think about what strategies they were using and why, like what were they trying to solve, basic root cause type stuff. And I said, well, why don't you go talk to the young people, your population that you're working with? Find a, organization or a few organizations that have the young people you're interested in and go talk to them about what they think the problems are and why they think those are the problems. And when we got back together, they were over the moon. They didn't even know how much they had. Like they knew they had some really good stuff, but the more we dug in, the more it was really clear how to narrow the work that they were doing and how unified young people were on here are the things that need to happen. And one of the challenges was that when they communicated to us what young people said, it was filtered through their biases, the language they use. And I said, show me what the young people actually wrote on the sticky notes and on the flow charts. And and it was actually the case that the young people were saying something different than what even they were interpreting. But it was incredibly powerful. And so, at Standpoint Consulting, that's the whole point of our work is to make sure we're seeing everybody's standpoint to better inform solutions. I want to go back to something else you mentioned about the budget being the best display of your values. When I was in philanthropy, briefly, when the first time I sat down with people, the very first conversation, I asked them to bring their budgets. And our initial conversation was all around how they were spending their money and what they were paying people and why they were making the choices they were making. And they were stunned that I asked for the budget in the first meeting because normally they get to go and make their pitch and everything. And I was like, nope, I don't care. I don't want to hear your pitch. I want to see it. And it was incredibly educational for them, and I loved watching organizations, executives go back to their boards and say, "Well, if we're gonna get this money, like, we need to think about these things," and really dig into their work. And then when I got into consulting, and people wanted me to come help them do values statements and all this stuff, I was like, "No, if we're gonna do this work, I wanna talk about your work, I wanna look at your budget, and then I'm gonna tell you what your values are." And they were like, "Well, how can you tell us what our values are?" I was like, "'Cause you're living them. You're living these values." And when I would present them to people, it would be all pearl clutching moments, right? "No, we don't believe that. We don't." I was like, "Well, this says you believe it. Like, this is what you're doing." And it's so powerful. So I'm glad you've said that. And I think that's one of the things I wanna really dig into more about what pragmatism really looks like in this work, right? You can't This is how you get down to brass tacks, as they say. You don't just talk about these big ideas and this is how we want to change the world. And you really talk about what you could actually do and whether you're doing it.
And it can start really small. So, I mentioned that one of my community roles is serving on the board of our city's anti-poverty agency. And so at our board meetings, we look at the financial statements every month, and it's often it feels like a very mundane exercise of just seeing like, okay, this line item went from this number to this number and da 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 da. And they show us the credit card statements from the people who buy the things, and go into such minutia because it's government funding and you have to have all the controls. And we were looking at these credit card statements of, meals for the parent council of the Head Start program or the leadership team retreat for the agency. And they were all these big box companies that were just like easy to buy from, probably. And so I asked a question just in the meeting and I said, hey, like, have y'all considered when you do have to buy meals, like supporting a local Black owned or minority owned business or women owned business in the community, as opposed to just defaulting to Panera Bread. No offense to Panera Bread. And and like people made that change as a result of asking that question. And so now like every parent council Head Start meeting, food is like from a local business. And so like that is like it can be such a small, like one little question can have ripple effects that shape where money goes and, pour money back into the community.
I really enjoyed this conversation. And you've given me a lot to think about. So when we get this transcript, I'm gonna be like, what about this? What about this? So so I really have appreciated it. But we've come to the end of our time together. So, Parv, what is your definition of equity and how does it show up in your life and work?
I would say we've talked about this before, but I think equity is about thriving for everyone. And it shows up in my life and my work as like a what will it take mindset. So it's like that optimism for the future of, you know, what do we believe? What will it take? And then just be dogged about the results and the outcomes and be flexible about how we get there. I feel like I always lean on the Michelle Obama framing of like, do we settle for the world as it is or do we work for the world as it should be? And I'm always working for the world as it should be. And at the same time, accepting the world as it is as our starting place.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. So if people want to follow you or learn more about you, where can they find you out there in the interweb?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and that's the main place probably. Otherwise, my social media presence is not very high.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. Well, thanks so much for this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to how folks react to this.
Thanks so much for having me, Adrian. Great
Mhm.
to be with you.